Welcome to the latest Evershed Sutherland Legal Insights podcast.
Welcome to Evershed Sutherland's Tech Talks episode 4. My name's Philip James. I'm a partner in Evershed Sutherland's Global Data Privacy and Cybersecurity Group, and also in our AI task force. Today's episode is going to focus on what Trump 2.0 could mean for AI policy in the global technology sector. You can debate whether it should be 2.0 or 3.0 or 4.0, but we've definitely got a new segment of Trump's presidency coming up. So we're excited about today's subject. Just 2 weeks after the US presidential election took place, I'm joined by a fantastic panel of Evershed Sutherland's partners, all from our Washington, D.C. office, so right in the heart of the Hill and the political cauldron, to discuss what Trump 2.0 could mean for AI policy and the global tech sector. So on today's podcast, we have MJ Wilson-Bilik, technology, privacy, and insurance regulatory partner who leads our AI and financial services in the US. MJ's recent focus has been to assist clients perform AI impact assessments and develop robust risk management, governance, and vendor management policies. Michael Bahar is a litigation partner and co-leads both our global cybersecurity and data privacy group, and also, interestingly, our congressional investigations group. Michael draws on experience at the White House with the US Intelligence Committee and serves as a commanding officer in US Navy and has specific expertise in cybersecurity. Neal Higgins co-leads our congressional investigations practice along with Michael and represents clients before US Congress and executive branch agencies, particularly on matters involving cybersecurity and national security. Neal has served in senior leadership positions at the White House, the CIA, and the US Senate. And last but not least, Mark Herlach is a member of our energy group and global co-chair of our competition trade and foreign investment team, particularly poignant in today's discussion. And Mark has played a leading role in resolving some of the most significant international trade disputes involving vital products such as automobiles and semiconductors. So just without further ado, let me turn to our panelists. I know that everyone is closely watching with popcorn the outcome and effects of the second Trump presidency. And I'd like to start, MJ, if I may, on what the repeal of the Biden executive order on AI might mean.
Thanks, Phil. So the Biden executive order on safe and trustworthy AI was issued in October of 2023. It focused both on the enormous benefits of AI and the significant risks of AI. And while it spoke of encouraging innovation, much of the AI focused on safeguarding the American public from two kinds of harm. One, the risks that AI posed to public safety in biotechnology, critical infrastructure, and national security. And secondly, the risks that AI could exacerbate social harms, such as AI-enabled discrimination, undue worker surveillance, and other violations of civil rights and civil liberties. And the executive order also expanded the role of NIST, the National Institute of Standards and Technology, and charged it with developing the standards for AI risk management. During his campaign, President-elect Trump vowed to repeal the Biden executive order, but it's unclear exactly what that will mean. For instance, it remains to be seen whether the Biden executive order, which significantly impacted the work of NIST in developing standards for responsible AI, will that be repealed, and whether the repeal of the executive order will result in a wind down of key initiatives such as the AI Safety Institute that is housed at NIST. Also, in his former administration, Trump supported the mission of NIST and its work on responsible AI. One of Trump's executive orders that is still in effect mandates federal agencies to protect civil liberties, privacy, and American values when developing and deploying AI. So it's unclear whether repeal of the Biden executive order will mean that the federal government continues to support the development of standards for responsible AI or not. One thing is clear, there's no appetite for an overarching federal AI regulator that would set the rules of the road for future development of AI. Such a regulator would be viewed as stifling innovation. Rather, the most we can expect is incremental approaches to AI regulation that modify or apply existing sector-based rules and regulations to AI. Momentum is growing to have Elon Musk take a leading role in U.S. AI policy, and Musk has long been known to support strong AI safety measures. For instance, he supported the California AI Safety Act, SB 1047, which divided Silicon Valley and was ultimately vetoed by California Governor Newsom, partly because safety was considered a federal issue, not a state issue. Musk's role in being a voice for safe AI systems could be significant in the next administration. Trump has also stated his dislike for, quote, woke aspects of the Biden executive order. Its focus on social harms and discrimination, meaning that he could stop and dismantle the efforts at agencies like the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, that's the EEOC, Justice Department, Federal Trade Commission, Labor Department, Federal Housing Administration, to name a few, that have regulated discriminatory use of AI in employment, advertisement, criminal justice, credit, and housing. This likely will encourage some states to fill the void. And so in sum, at the federal level, we are likely to see movement away from building safeguards around the social harms of AI, and the focus will shift to encouraging innovative uses of AI throughout the economy, and especially in national security, where it could be coupled with strong safety focus.
MJ, thank you very much indeed. Particularly interesting sort of moving, I mean, without getting into all the political changes and chameleon effects we've been seeing, but sort of moving from neoliberalism to woke liberalism and now Trump 2.0. But if I may, I might just turn to you, Michael. I know you wear many hats, but I'm particularly keen to hear your take on anticipated cyber privacy and AI enforcement, both at a federal and separately at a state level in the wake of the recent outcome of the presidential election.
Thanks, Phil. And I think there's going to be a reason that I wear multiple hats because, as MJ said in relation to AI, I think in general, we are going to see a deprioritization at the federal level of regulations and enforcement, right? And that includes not just AI regulations and enforcement, but cybersecurity and data privacy. There's going to be, though, an important caveat to that, because I think there will be this deprioritization of regulation enforcement, except where cybersecurity and privacy intersect with advanced technologies like AI or quantum computing, national security, and trade policy. So it's at that intersection, right, where I think at the federal level, the Trump 2.0 administration is still going to keep its focus firmly on those companies that are developing advanced technologies, and because of that, are a target for certain nation-state actors looking to steal that or to otherwise disrupt U.S. national security. The same way, if there are companies that perhaps send a large amount of personal data overseas to so-called countries of concern, I think that was also going to be an area where the Trump administration continues to focus. And I think when we talk about regulation, we sometimes forget that there's also a congressional aspect too. And again, when we see advanced technologies like AI and quantum intersecting with national security and trade policy, that may, as Neal may want to talk about further, also escalate to the political level, where we don't just see regulatory enforcement action, we see congressional inquiries, if not congressional hearings. And both US companies and foreign companies could find themselves on the congressional hot seat. I think it's also interesting that some of this may not even be that partisan, right? I think one of the areas that there has traditionally been over the last few years bipartisan consensus is on the national security risks that advanced technologies pose if they're either stolen or misused, or that there is a foreign element to the development or foreign recipient of some of that information. I think the last point, Phil, that's worth pointing out is, in general, right, while I still think there will be this deprioritization of federal level enforcement and regulation, except in that intersection between trade, national security, advanced technologies, and cybersecurity. I think the states, the US states, and particularly New York and California, and sometimes maybe even Texas, are going to rush in to fill any perceived void in cybersecurity and privacy regulation and enforcement. They may not even need to have an enhanced privacy law, right? Like New York doesn't have its version of the CCPA. Instead, it's going to use its consumer protection authorities, right? And unfair and deceptive trade practices, as we've already started to see, to enforce cybersecurity and data privacy. I think the last point is too, and I think this is a question everyone asks, is what's the fate of federal privacy legislation in the United States? And I think MJ would agree with me. I think Neal would agree with me as well, is that now that we know that it's going to be one party rule for at least the next 2 years, the prospects of federal privacy legislation are actually quite good because it's going to be seen as very pro-business to eliminate the patchwork and provide a degree of uniformity. But the interesting piece, again, is who's going to enforce that. Because in general, I don't see a very robust privacy enforcement at the federal level. Instead, what's likely going to happen, maybe in exchange for preemption, is that states' attorney generals are charged with enforcing the federal privacy legislation. And with that, I take it back to you, Phil.
Michael, thank you very much. So insightful, and it really is interesting to see how this is going to play out. But Neal, quickly, if I can just pivot to you. I mean, Michael was mentioning this intersection of cyber privacy and AI with trade policy and national security. Just picking up on that theme of national security, given your background in the CIA elsewhere, how might the new administration change things there?
Yeah, Phil, it's a great question. Picking up on MJ's point that the incoming administration plans to scrap the October 2023 executive order, and Michael's note that they are likely to pivot from risk mitigation and regulation to a focus on innovation, competition, and national security. I think there may actually be some through lines on AI policy when it comes to national security. More specifically, there have been several rulemakings, a few of which are still ongoing, that flowed out of the October 2023 executive order, as well as some executive orders that both came before and after that EO on AI. And those rulemakings will impact how we protect US AI capabilities and how our adversaries are able to advance their own AI capabilities. So, for example, earlier this year, the Department of Commerce issued a proposed rulemaking with know your customer requirements for cloud service providers, as well as mandatory reporting on when a foreign person used cloud service providers to train an AI model that could enable cyber activities. At first, that looks like it's more focused on infrastructure as a service capabilities, but really there is a core nexus there to foreign nation and particularly adversary development of AI. That focus on national security also, of course, includes export controls on advanced semiconductors, with now a general licensing scheme for approved data centers, as well as restrictions on outbound investment that would advance particularly China's development of technologies foundational to AI, right? So it's a combination both of protecting infrastructure as a service provided by US providers, as well as keeping an eye on foreign nations' both ability to acquire US developed foundational technology and to receive the investment to develop their own. Last but not least, there's also rules impacting the collection and sharing of sensitive data about US persons and US critical infrastructure, which really, again, has a focus on what foreign adversaries could do with that data if they applied AI capabilities against it. That includes DOJ rules currently out for comment on the transfer of bulk sensitive personal data and data related to government facilities. But it also applies to the, again, outstanding Department of Commerce rule that would limit the sale of driving systems or vehicle connectivity systems manufactured in a list of several countries that includes China. The focus there is on the ability of such connected cars to collect information about U.S. critical infrastructure that would be of interest, again, to foreign adversaries. Many of those rulemakings are ongoing and unsettled. And the question we're keeping a close eye on is whether the incoming administration allows them to continue apace, hits pause, or even tightens them up. But again, this area, the intersection of AI with national security and international competition, is one where there may be some consistency, some through line from the outgoing administration to the incoming administration.
Neal, thank you very much indeed. Just the level of insight you have and your experience is fantastic on this area. If I can now move to Mark Herlach, who is co-chair of our competition, trade and foreign investment practice. But Mark, can you shed a bit of light on the implications of the imposition of trade tariffs, which Mr. Trump has obviously been pretty keen on?
Thanks, Phil. As everybody knows, Mr. Trump has emphasized during the campaign his love of tariffs. And you also have to consider what he did during his first administration when one looks at the future, and it's clear tariffs are something that we're going to see more of. Now, having said that, I think it's really critical to keep in mind from the perspective of President Trump, tariffs are simply a tool to obtain leverage. And we saw that in the first Trump administration with respect to a number of matters, particularly the steel and aluminum cases, but not restricted to them. I also think it's important to note that although China is a major target, Europe and Mexico are also in the crosshairs. For example, President Trump has already stated that he's prepared to use high tariffs against Mexico in order to help deal with the border problem. And what's important to keep in mind about the general use of tariffs is that it's going to produce a response. Other countries will not sit idly by while their products are subject to high tariffs in the U.S. So these tariffs have a cost, and it's not just a cost to the U.S. consumer, it's also a cost to the world economy. And one of the things we're going to have to watch for is the multiplier effect of any tariffs that the Trump administration adds to the existing tariffs that are already in place. I would add also, sort of echoing what Neal just said, that there's still going to be some continuity here because, as everybody knows, the Biden administration, as a general rule, kept the Trump tariffs in place. So, I mean, this is not going to be entirely a sea change, although there's certainly a much greater enthusiasm for tariffs in the form of the incoming administration. I'd like to move now to a couple of other areas which both Michael and Neal have touched on, and that's really the relationship between trade and national security. And the two primary things to keep in mind are the impact of export controls and investment restrictions. Export controls are the key tool that the U.S. uses to deny China access to advanced technology and to limit the development of its AI capabilities. What's important to note here is that the U.S. has a very broad view of how its export controls apply and effectively takes the position that they have extraterritorial effect. In other words, they apply outside the U.S. as well as inside the U.S. They're very complex rules, but the fact of the matter is that this expansive approach affects commerce, it affects supply chains, and it affects the location of new manufacturing facilities and the ability to collaborate with parties offshore. Just as an example, the U.S. recently ordered Taiwan's semiconductor manufacturing company to stop selling advanced chips to Chinese customers. And TSMC has indicated that's what it's going to do. So the impact on AI is quite clear. These restrictions are going to affect the pace of AI development because this is one area in which there really is going to be some decoupling between China and the U.S. The other thing to keep in mind are foreign investment restrictions. Now, in the U.S., these are generally administered by the Committee on Foreign Investment in the U.S., CFIUS. In that regard, it's important to keep in mind that the scope of CFIUS jurisdiction keeps expanding to the point that the committee also now monitors M&A activity involving U.S. companies and technology to make sure that people are notifying it of transactions of interest. Chinese ownership of high-tech companies is subject to close scrutiny and in many instances may be blocked, as well as Chinese access to advanced technology. And then it's also notable that Treasury recently issued its final regulations implementing the Biden administration's outbound investment restrictions, which limit U.S. investments in China with regard to certain AI systems, semiconductors, and quantum information technologies. All of this reflects the fact that limiting China's AI capabilities is a key U.S. policy goal. Trade and investment restrictions on China have bipartisan support, and they're going to become even more pronounced during a second Trump administration. Finally, I just note that for AI, the next key step is adoption and deployment. And everything that we've been talking about is going to affect the pace of adoption and deployment and potentially the ability to finance that progress. I would just close by noting that, as we all know, Mr. Trump is mercurial and transactional. So the only certainty here is future uncertainty.
Thank you very much. What a great thing to bring a close to this fascinating discussion. Thank you very much for all the contributors who participated today. That provided a very, very important insight into some of the things we can expect, even if some of it is uncertainty, with the new administration and what changes we might see in AI policy and the global tech sector. I would just add a change on this side of the Atlantic, that on the EU side of things, the EU has issued its first draft code of conduct for general purpose AI models, which covers, amongst other things, transparency and copyright related rules, as well as risk identification for systemic risks. So and that, of course, does affect providers of those models, even though we've been focusing on US law related to AI models, but some of these laws have extraterritorial effects. So there is a lot going on in this space at the moment. And thank you very much for providing that insight today.
Thank you for listening to the Evershed Sutherland Legal Insights podcast.